Hi, everyone. I'm Mark DeYmaz, founding pastor of the Mosaic Church of Central Arkansas in Little Rock, Arkansas, also the co-founder of the Mosaics Global Network. But in my role today in this podcast with my good friends, we're talking about church transition, how to move a church from homogeneity to healthy multi-ethnicity in a way that is advancing the gospel, blessing the community, and fulfilling the commands of God, the mandate in the Bible, that we should be a church for all people, not just some, again, for the sake of the gospel. I'm in this role today as part of my role with Exponential as the Multiethnic Church Next Director for Exponential Next. And this is a series of podcasts that we're doing here to, again, advance this vision of building healthy multi-ethnic churches on earth as it is in heaven to advance a credible gospel in an increasingly diverse, painfully polarized, and cynical society. And again, I'm joined with good friends today across the board. I'm going to let them introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the conversation. So, Libin, why don't we start with you?
Hey, everybody. Honored to be here. My name is Libin Abraham. Get the joy of serving as lead pastor at Bentry Bible Fellowship in the North Dallas area, specifically in Carrollton, Texas. And honored to be here. Grew up in South India, but moved around quite a bit and been in the Texas area for now, since 2010, and been leading Bentry since 2021.
Yeah, Bentry, of course, is the host site of the Mosaics Global Network Conference, which we just had our sixth back in November of 2025. Libin, your team was amazing. The venue was awesome. We really appreciate that. And your first time to host the conference. And so we really appreciate that and the hospitality you all showed to us. Mark, you and I go way back. I don't know, 15 years or so. But Mark, tell everyone about you.
I'm Mark Hearn. I'm the senior pastor at First Baptist Church, Duluth, Georgia, suburbs of Atlanta. I've been here almost 16 years. I have been to 5 of those 6 Mosaic National Conferences, and first met Mark just trying to find someone who would speak into our life about how to transition an existing church, a 140-year-old church, from a monocultural to a multicultural model. We're in the 6th most diverse county in all of America in the suburbs of Atlanta. And we desperately needed to know how to reach across to reach different nations and different languages.
Yeah, Mark, appreciate that. In fact, those of you watching and listening today, we've got some diversity here in terms of background. Here we've got a Southern Baptist and Mark Hearn, of course, Libin's at Bentry, non-denominational, and our good friends Oscar and RJ with the Nazarenes up in Bend, Oregon. Tell us about you guys.
My name is RJ, and this is Oscar. We're co-pastors here. I spent 24 years just planting churches, and now we're here in an old church, over 100-year-old church, trying to help it transition. So Oscar and I have been together for about 7 years now. You can tell them about you.
Yeah, my name is Oscar Acosta, and I'm originally from Venezuela, and I've been here in Bend, Oregon for 10 years, working with Pastor RJ for 7 years, and just love the vision and mission that we have in the church, working with people from a lot of different countries here in our church.
Yeah, well, Bend, Oregon is a beautiful place. Mount Bachelor, coming from Venezuela, have you got to do some skiing up there on Mount Bachelor, Oscar? Have you done that?
I haven't done any, but looks like in couple of days, I'm going to Mount Bachelor to try my first time.
Oh, yeah. I should have mentioned we're from Hawaii. He's from Venezuela. We're really new at the winter thing, so we're not really good at the snow stuff.
I got you. Well, I was a youth pastor in Portland. We used to take our kids to Mount Bachelor in terms of winter skiing. So you guys stay safe. Don't break a leg, as they say in showbiz. Break a leg, don't break a leg, and enjoy yourselves up there. Hey, Mark, I want to start with you. You and I go way back, of course. You've actually written 2 books on this subject. Generally speaking, about Technicolor. That was a label you used, which I love. But let's take it back 10, 15 years or more in your own life, starting personally, because I imagine for all of you, this is a calling, right? It's not just something that you just did, or even the church might have asked you to do, but somewhere along the line, each of you personally, I know, and I can imagine that you would have heard the voice of God. This is a great church, a great environment, things are good, but there's something missing in terms of the maturity of the church and the vision of Christ for churches on earth as it is in heaven. So Mark, take us back in your own personal journey. Talk a little bit about how you came to understand this as a calling and begin to lead your church away from monoculturalism to multiculturalism.
Well, I have a bachelor's degree in Bible, a master's degree in evangelism, and a doctorate degree in church growth. And so I had not only adopted the homogeneous unit principle, but I had taught it on the college level. And here I moved into the most diverse county in all of Georgia, one of the most diverse counties in America. And when I moved into our home 15 years ago, our neighbors on one side of us are Malaysian and Vietnamese. The neighbors on the other side of us are South Korean. Neighbors behind us are from South Asia, India. Across the street from us is a family from Zimbabwe. At the end of the cul-de-sac, there's a doctor from Puerto Rico. Across the street from them, there's a 3-generation family from Nigeria. And none of those people groups were in my church. And so I said, what are we going to have to do to reach across and to be able to invite my neighbors to be a part of the community of faith that I was pastoring? And so this has been a journey. It's been something that we've watched across the years. It has been something where we've adopted principles and we've tried things that didn't work and tried things that did work. And that's why the reason for the 2 books. It's a discovery process. And as we have discovered some best practices, we wanted to share those with other people that were traversing the same kind of pathway. So it's been a blessing to watch. We now have 60 different nationalities that comprise our local church membership.
Yeah, up from virtually none before, predominantly a white Southern Baptist church in the South in Georgia. That's amazing, Mark, over about a 10 or 15-year period, I believe.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
It was almost an entirely homogenous congregation, almost all Anglo, all English speaking. Now we have live interpretation on Sunday morning in Korean, Mandarin, and in Spanish. Occasionally, we'll have guests who will also interpret into other of our languages. Those are the 3 largest non-English speaking households in our local city. So we've made real inroads to be able to reach people in the community. We have the largest English school in Gwinnett County. Over 700 people enrolled in our ESL, learning English through our local church. And so it's allowed us to be able to make some real impact into those different communities.
Well, that's fantastic. Fantastic testimony, really. And the how and the what of all that is what we want to talk about here. But at a macro level, it's intentional, right? You've taken intentional steps, hearing from the voice of God, observing your community, thinking about the church, and leaning into this vision intentionally. Libin, I imagine your own personal background in part brings you to this understanding and a vision, but talk to us about you and how you've leaned into this vision, and particularly in your leadership at Bentree.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in South India. My dad was a pastor and church planter. When I was about 8.5 years old, we moved to Chicago for a few months and then Oklahoma City. And then we found ourselves in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I couldn't even say the word Chattanooga, but that's where we spent most of our childhood. And but predominantly, I grew up in South Indian churches. But as I was in seminary in different phases of life, I began to serve at different ethnic groups in terms of churches. So I was a youth pastor at an Ethiopian church for like 3.5 years. When I went to interview there, I thought they were Indian. They thought I was Ethiopian, and we were both wrong. But our hearts just immediately connected, and getting to serve in that context was amazing. My church in Houston, right before I came to Houston, before we moved to Dallas, we were 50% white and 50% everything else. And we had 95 different languages that were spoken within our congregation. And we were in Fort Bend County, which at that time was like the #1 most diverse county in America. So incredibly diverse in the Houston side of things. And then when we came to Bentree, Bentree had a heart to become diverse, but it was a pretty homogenous church. And it was in a suburbia in the Plano, North Dallas area. So it was just a predominantly white church. But the church had a heart to become a church that reflected our community. And so when I came in 21, I would say we were maybe 98% white. And I just told the church, look, we don't have a plan for diversity, but we want to have a prayer and a posture for diversity. And not really just diversity, because that's not the goal of heaven. It is unity in diversity. That's really what the heart of this is. And so we just really began to pray and cultivate a posture within our body, just really going back to scripture. What is the heart of God? How does the cross lead to reconciliation of various people groups? And we knew that our city was incredibly diverse. And we really had that conviction of, we don't just want the gospel visibly to be good news for those who are here. We want it to be good news for all people in our community. And so we just really began to cultivate a posture and a heart for it. And in the last 5 years, we went from being, let's say, 98% white to almost 70% white and 30% everything else in less than 5 years. And so we've just seen God do a beautiful work in bringing people from various ethnic backgrounds and racial upbringings and backgrounds into the life of our church. And it's funny, we had a Spanish service in the afternoon, which was great, and now it's become a sister church of ours. But there was a lot of kind of a grassroots movement of a lot of Spanish speakers say, we just want to actually be in the English service. Can we have headsets? And because we've got first and second generation, and we actually want to worship together as family. So that's actually grown more rapidly than when for 10 years we had a separate service for our Spanish-speaking community. And then there's other people groups and language groups that are wanted to do the same, a little bit to what Mark was sharing as well. And so, and we've had some intentional things of having just discussion groups around race and some of the dark side of our history and the prejudices that can kind of happen. And we've had classroom environments and really group environments to really process that and to see how we can avail ourselves to what the Lord is doing. And we've seen our worship culture change. I think oftentimes the worship culture may be a primary hindrance to people from different walks of life and ethnicity feeling like they can worship wholeheartedly and not just adapt to another cultural environment, but to really feel like they're a part of the worship experience. And so we just seen those kind of things change within our body. And our heart is to continue to reflect that diversity and unity in our leadership, in our elder board, and just even just in how some of our programs are laid out. We've had to change some things in terms of like, hey, small groups in homes may work great for one demographic, but it may not for another demographic who are afraid to go into predominantly white neighborhoods or something, you know? And so what does on-campus groups look like as a bridge, as a next step, so that we're not asking people to take a leap, but they can just take a next step. And so systematically, it's changed some things in how we function and do discipleship as well. So those are a few things that we're seeing in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, there was so much good how and what in what Libin just rattled off. I hope you go back and listen to that and take some good notes on that in terms of the prayer and the posture. And I know Bent Tree and churches like that, Mark, RJ, Oscar, you do as well, churches that for years in the late 20th century into the 21st, such a passion to send people and resources across the ocean, but they're not even known across the street. And that's what you're talking about, where all of a sudden, hey, we have this passion. You have a church with a passion for missions. And most churches do. Many churches have that passion, but that mission has always been seen as overseas. And now churches like yours are transitioning when they have leadership like yourself and others who are not just thinking about what are we doing overseas, but across the street, finding credibility in the diversity of the community, meeting empathetic needs, and earning a credibility to advance that gospel for all people like you're talking about. RJ, Oscar, we talked about a couple in terms of Libin and Mark and their own personal calling. I'm going to ask you a little bit on another subject, going back in your own journey, about Nazarene. You're in a Nazarene denomination. Again, Mark, Southern Baptist. Talk to us about what that is like when you're trying to lead this type of transition in a denomination like the Nazarenes or Southern Baptists. Generally speaking, from a denominational standpoint, how was your vision received? Again, it very well could have been, attaboy, that sounds good for you, but not for us. But talk to us about transition at the grassroots level in the early days of being part of a denomination.
It's there's a lot going with that. I mean, when you're part of a denomination, and Southern Baptist, Nazarene churches are humongous in the missions world. And so that transition you're talking about is a huge, huge one, where missions is what we do. That's what we do. And they separate the local part of it from the global part of it. And so I think a big part of it for us was, trying to help them realize that the mission happens home and abroad. Like, we're not stopping world missions because we're trying to reach our neighbors. We're trying to say it's one mission, and we do this across the street, and we do this around the world. And so within our particular denomination, there is a big push on trying to start Spanish-speaking churches, whatever types of churches all around. But I feel like, for the most part, there's not a lot of hope for transitioning churches that are over 100 years old. And so within our denomination, it's been a lot of church planting, which is my world. And I feel like our district superintendent almost sent us to put me here in this church as a test to see what happens when you put a church planter in a 100-plus-year-old church. Does it kill it? Is it possible for an old ship to kind of turn and change? And I would say for the first 5 years, we would have said, no, it just kills it. That's pretty much what it does. But there's a lot of history there, just to kind of reshape the way that people look at missions, to say it's not just overseas. Every church has to take 15% and send it overseas. But in our particular context, we're looking at a parking lot that belongs to our church that is filled with beauty college students. And so my first month here, I took a handful, probably 50 $10 gift cards, and I just asked them questions about different things. Not a single person who parked in our parking lot knew that we were a church. Yeah, we have this robust missions program all over the world, but people that are parking like in our parking lot didn't even recognize us as a church at all.
Yeah, for me, being from Venezuela, we received a lot of mission team from here that went down to Venezuela, and really for me, this love to work with people from other cultures start there in Venezuela, working with these teams, and see how people that they don't speak the same language and they connect. I kind of speak a little bit English and try to help people to translate, but they didn't want my help. They were just trying to communicate with whatever sign language or anything that they can. So God put in my heart really from that time that there is more like reaching people that talk and think like you, and really coming here and working with Pastor RJ. We feel that we have the same vision about reaching people that doesn't speak and look like us, and like Pastor RJ said, the Church of the Nazarene, we put a lot of effort in the missions outside, but we're learning that the mission also happen in our area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you guys are modeling one of the very core principles of building a healthy multi-ethnic church, where we're doing it by team-based leadership and sharing and the leadership structures of the church, whether the elder board or the trustees or deacons, or even at the senior level. And RJ, you introduced yourselves when we started as co-pastors. Talk to us about that this shared leadership, where obviously you're white, Oscar's from Venezuela, but this is modeling really Acts 13:1, where two were from Africa, one from the Middle East, one from Asia Minor, one from the Mediterranean. Acts 13:1, I like to say, is the first staff page of a church in all of the Bible and all of the world, right? Talking about the leadership team at Antioch, that if it's not modeled, this idea of unity and diversity that Libin brought up amongst leadership, we can't expect that from the people. So talk to us about the dynamic of in your case, this co-leadership team functioning like one senior pastor, but really two.
Mm-hmm. That was tough. That's one of the hardest parts of doing what we're all trying to do, is the shared leadership, the shared authority, from the board perspective, from the staffing perspective, from the co-leadership perspective. Everyone within our church at this point, it's taken 7 years to get there, recognizes us both equally as their pastor. And that takes a long time. But back in the early days when we were trying to figure out how do you reset authority within a church, especially in a church that's 100 plus years old, where there are a lot of church bosses that have claimed it who aren't even on staff. They're running the board, they're running this. And so there's a whole nother level of prying leadership from there, authority from there, and then kind of resetting. But in the beginning years, a big part of what we were doing is we were dreaming about what our church could look like in 20 years. And that's how we set the staffing and the board structuring. We did it wrong most of the time. In fact, the workshop that we presented at Mosaics is mostly about all of our mistakes and kind of how we rebounded and what we learned from those things. At the very beginning, there was a lot of people saying things like, to me especially, you represent everything that's wrong with America. And it was because we were trying to come up with a way that in a church like ours, where it's not an appointed elder structure, it's a voted on board, How do you structure a ballot that enables the type of shared leadership and shared authority that we're looking for? And we did it wrong first, and it seemed like everything that's wrong with America. And at some point, it switched in the language and how we presented. So we have one of our long-term goals is what we call a fourth generation church, where you have the first generation who comes from another country. And for the most part, what we experienced in Hawaii is that they really like to cling to their home. Like they're looking for the language, the food, the church style, the music, all those types of things. Their kids, second and third generations, quite frequently reject. And then maybe third and fourth generations are trying to rediscover who they are. What's the language? And so in Hawaii, all the churches we started were kind of a fourth generation church. And our goal was to have a place for all those generations to kind of find themselves. So, for instance, in our case, it's an English service, a Spanish service, and a bilingual service. And so within the one church itself, you have hopefully a place for all those different generations to find each other. But the hardest part of that in the early days was the shared leadership. People didn't like the idea of us being co-pastors. I was from the bigger congregation, and the partnership that we had, which I think is pretty typical in old white churches, is, they're breaking our stuff. They broke the chairs. They didn't clean up. They let their kids. In fact, you used to tell them about how you'd come to staff meetings at the church and be a little bit worried.
Yeah, every Sunday night, me and my wife, we start thinking, okay, what we did wrong today, what, because we knew that Monday night was going to say, oh, you guys did that and that. But I think for me, this shared leadership take a lot of humility. I remember one of the first time that I met Pastor RJ. He came and talked to me, and the first question that he asked me was, what can the English church learn from the Spanish church? So that question for me was like, what? We're supposedly the one that have to learn from you. But that really mean a lot to me and to our group. And to this point, I think we're not only sharing leadership between pastor, but the church board. Now we have Hispanic representation in the church board, and it's not only just the senior pastor, but like in every area we have to have. We try to have that shared leadership.
In fact, we're hiring a worship leader who doesn't speak English, and so for an all-white church, 7 years ago, to step into a place where they're hiring a full-time worship leader who doesn't speak English, who has to lead in the Spanish and English and the bilingual services, that's come a long ways.
Yeah, again, kind of with Libin and Mark earlier, so many principles in there if you're watching or listening to this podcast, to go back and think about this, the intentionality of empowering diverse leaders, of this idea of shared leadership. We have that in the Trinity, right? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If you think about it, humanize them for a moment, three distinct roles and personalities, and yet functioning as one. And it's not always like that, but this is a model, and certainly empowering diverse leaders is part of what it takes to build a healthy multi-ethnic church. And by the way, when you're talking about the fourth generation, I've often said, and I've observed over these last 25 years, that first gen churches typically 2 feet in, second gen 1 foot in, 1 foot out, third generation 2 feet out, which is the need to create churches for all people. So first, second, third gen can find what they're looking for and be under one roof, building the unity and diversity that Libin's talking about. Mark, Southern Baptist Church, a little bit different model, of course, than the Nazarenes, but you're the senior pastor. But I know you went about empowering diverse leadership. It may not be co-leadership, that may not be your language, but talk to us about what you've done in the Southern Baptist environment as a white man leading a white church, but now with this wonderful diverse community and the leadership that you've empowered alongside to work in partnership and collaboration with you.
Well, it was a much slower process for us, I think, in how incrementally we had to move to go to shared leadership, but it was something we valued, something we shared openly, and we saw begin to take place. One of the first things that happened was among our deacon body. Matter of fact, the deacon leadership of our church, in a meeting that I was unable to attend in the summer, got together and began to identify leaders that they perceived in the church who came from different ethnic backgrounds to try to recruit them to be a part of the deacon ministry. And that began to take place. And we ordained the first non-white deacons in the 140-year history of our church some 10 years ago now. And that just kind of broke the ground to say, okay, we've got people of color who are taking positions of leadership in the church. And that began to transfer also into staff hires as we began looking at staff ministers. Now we've got folks that are on our staff that are from South Korea, from Indonesia, from Jamaica, African American. We had a Nigerian pastor who's now gone to another church to serve in a similar role. And so the Lord allowed us to be able to diversify our leadership in such a way to where that people began to respond. But one of the unique challenges that we've had is that many of our people that are coming to our church are new converts. They're new to the faith. And so we're having to mature them in the faith, and we're needing for them to take positions of leadership probably faster than you would generally think in the life of a church. And so we began something just this past year that we call the Technicolor Leadership Cohort. And we're meeting once a month with a group of 30 identified next-gen leaders of color. And so we're specifically trying to pour into those folks to say, hey, we see within you potential leadership capacity that you can help us to be able to move this to the next generation. And so we've watched that transpire over this past year, and it has been a tremendous blessing to us. And we're beginning to see those people assume positions of leadership in the life of our church.
That's fantastic. And getting ahead of it, I think churches and pastors can play for today or position for tomorrow. And it's always wiser to do both, but particularly to position for tomorrow. It sounds like you're doing that and being very intentional, again, to empower diverse leaders, which is not to say that the world's way of calling that is DEI, right? On the one hand, you have churches that want nothing to do with anyone who's not like them. And the world's way is just, it's DEI. That's what's become, or being woke, if you will. And of course, that carries a bad connotation in a lot of circles today because it's really superfluous. But what we're talking about is very biblical. We talked about Acts 13:1, the church at Antioch, the diversity of leadership, modeling this and understanding that from a biblical perspective is what we're really talking about. Again, if you're watching or listening to this, we're not just talking about grabbing the first African American that you see or somebody diverse, white in your context, whatever, and positioning them. No, it's looking for people who share your theology, your understanding of the church, how it is, and empowering them in a biblical and theological way, as we saw the church at Antioch do. Libin, thinking about yours, talk to us from the other side. You're in a predominantly white church. They hired a person of color. In your case, someone from India. What is that like? If you're talking to churches or pastors right now, perhaps that are looking to empower diverse leaders, not in the way that the DEI kind of connotation that can be, where it's just a random person of color that doesn't necessarily have the competence or the background in a level of expertise, which is not always true, but sometimes that's the bad rap when people use the word DEI or woke. But in your case, here was a traditionally white church that empowered Asian Indian to be their leader. So what was that like for them? What was that like for you? And what kind of advice would you give to other white churches that are looking to empower diverse leaders, again, not for the sake of diversity and diversity's sake, but in a biblical and a healthy way?
Yeah. I think when I came to Bentry, some of the elders made it clear, look, we're not hiring you just because you're of an Indian origin or because you're brown. We really see God's call in your life, your training, your gifting, all those kind of things. And so they had to make that clear. And they had to also almost make it clear, especially to the body. Like when we had our first Black elder, they had to say, this is not a part of any initiative. Like, we just see God's hand on this man of God. He is qualified to be an elder. And so I think that could also cause confusion. But I think I would encourage churches really just to expand their pool of where they're looking. Oftentimes we're looking from the same seminaries, from the same ethnic groups of people. Just expand the pool and don't lessen the criteria or the qualifications you're looking for. No, keep it at the same level. Just expand the pool. And I often get asked by ethnic leaders, how challenging is it, or how has it been for you as an ethnic minority to lead a different ethnic majority church? I said, look, when I look at the scriptures, I actually see God using a lot of ethnic minorities in leadership positions, whether it be Esther in Persia, or the Hebrews in Babylon. All throughout the scriptures, wherever you are geographically, we as a spiritual community, we have an exilic nature about us. And so actually the story of scripture empowers people who are feeling like they're in the ethnic minority group, because all of the people that God chose, whether it be Jews and Gentiles, whatever it may be, like God handpicked ethnic minority people in their context. And that actually gives us a spiritual advantage of understanding our exilic nature, because until Jesus comes back, I do think we are a spiritual minority on the earth. And so that actually helps us lean into that. For me, I learned, something that I had to really process in leading changes. I didn't want to lose my church when I was leading change. And so the workshop I led at Mosaics was, how do you lead a church without losing the church? Because I see that happening so much, where with a great heart, people want to lead change, but in the process of leading change, they lose the church. And I would encourage you, if you're in a space that's leading and managing change, you need to have both a pastoral and prophetic gifting, or people around you with those two giftings, because prophetically, you can set the direction, but pastorally, you must set the pace. Let me just say that again. Prophetically, you can set the direction, but pastorally, you can set the pace. Sometimes the role of a prophet is cast a big vision and push people to it, not taking into regard who's on the journey with you, where people are, and you want to move fast and get to a destination. Prophetic vision and ministry is needed in casting the vision, but coupled with that, you need a pastoral leadership, a heart for pastoral ministry that helps you determine the pace of how can we move our congregation at a healthy pace, where this is not going to be overnight. And as Mark was saying, like, this change can take time. It can take years. And we've got to be willing to not just start with where we are, but to start with where our people are. So when I came to Bentry, I had a big vision. I was coming from a healthy church, and Bentry had gone through so many changes, from losing a 28-year, 10-year lead pastor, going through COVID, going through and navigating all of the racial dysfunction that was happening in the country, and how do we speak to that, all those kind of things. And so one of my amazing leaders and sisters at Bentry, Joanne Homo, she just said, look, Libin, you're ready to lead a lot of change, but the staff need to sit on the bench and breathe for a minute, And that was really helpful, because I was coming in, let's go, let's take the hill. And our staff was tired and our body was grieving. And so we needed to, set the direction prophetically, but determine the pace pastorally, so that you can lead a church to where God is calling and not lose the church in the process. So I would just encourage people who are managing change just with those words.
Yeah, and that, again, argues for empowering diverse leaders around you, not just the staff or people working for you, but some people that are working with you. As you all know, here at our church, I've been with my colleague, Harry Lee's Chinese. We've been together over 24 years now. We often joke we're the best pastor in America, right? Because Harry's like everything I'm not. He is that pastoral. He is the quintessential pastor, and I'm more typically the visionary. And together we function the strength of our gifting. We are able to lead, as you said, with that prophetic vision, but also pace, and that tension of leadership actually makes the church stronger. But back to what Oscar and RJ were talking about, it requires humility, building relationships of transparency and trust, and yielding to that. In fact, sometimes when people introduce, I'm sure you all have this at times, oh, here's the so-and-so expert on this subject. Let me just tell you, if somebody claims to be an expert on this subject of building healthy multi-ethnic church, do not listen to that person, because it is a journey. It's a lifelong journey. We're all picking up language and understanding and practical principles as we go. Libin, I want to stay with you related to that, because in this leading, the prophetic side as well as the pastoral, the pace side of things, some of the common hows of building a healthy multi-ethnic church: developing cross-cultural relationships, pursuing cross-cultural competences. We're talking about here for a moment. Sorry, those are my automatic lights going off. I have to wave my arm every now and then. But promoting a spirit of inclusion, right? When you think about some of those general hows that apply in every context, how have you gone about doing that, leading the change at the pace you are, helping people develop these relationships cross-culturally, understanding competence, if you will, and or promoting a spirit of inclusion in your church. Talk to us as we turn to kind of the final 15, 20 minutes of our time together. I want all of you to speak to some practical principles that people listening or watching this podcast can implement in their own setting.
Yeah. For me, when I prepare a sermon, I had this conviction that preaching is a two-way listening. It is listening to God and listening to your people and connecting the word of God to the people of God. I think that same principle can actually apply to leading a multi-ethnic church, because if God has surrounded you with the nations, do you know culturally who is there? So there is this need to grow in cultural intelligence. In Acts 17 says God has set the boundaries where everyone live, and he's surrounded us by the nations so that as people are searching for God, they could find him. And so really understanding who is it that God has strategically placed around you near your church, so that we can begin to pray specifically for them. But I would encourage you to ask this: if you're wanting to lead, is your heart to have a multi-ethnic church first, or is it to have multi-ethnic relationships first? Like sometimes we assume, okay, let's get the multi-ethnic church and then we'll build the relationships. But that's not how any church works, right? Like, no, start with multi-ethnic relationships from those in your community. Get to know the people who are living around you. And as those relationships are formed, as Mark was saying, then you can start inviting neighbors and friends, because they have met you. They have a relationship with you. They trust you. They may not trust Jesus yet, but they know you. They trust you. And so as you invite your congregation to develop personal relationships with those who are different than them, I think that becomes a bridge of actually a church growing multi-ethnically, because sometimes we assume let's grow our church multi-ethnically first and then develop the relationships. But I think it's the inverse that has to happen. And so for our church, we do bus tours, just understanding the story for African Americans in our community. Like what is the history there? So just getting our people to understand the culture or the history of race in our community. We have threaded groups that intentionally just put people into ethnically diverse relationships, both within our church and outside of our church, to say, let's get to know the cultural values and the storylines and the narratives that form us and shape us. And so I think those kind of things help us grow in our cultural intelligence. And I think for us, we noticed, okay, our services are growing diverse, but that's not success. Success is when our servant leadership and when living rooms and funerals and weddings are diverse, not just when our worship services are diverse. Because you can do multicultural ministry, and as one author said, doing multicultural ministry is like dating, but a multicultural church is like marriage, because you don't just go on a date and then go your separate ways. No, we become a new kind of creation. And it's not just that it's a marriage, it is actually an arranged marriage, because this is God bringing people from all around the world together as one bride. It's his church. And so we actually, we reshape our preferences and our instincts, and we begin to love in the way of Jesus, and it forms us as a new people. So getting to know who we are as a community, and really having a heart for that, and beginning with those personal relationships before we become a multicultural church would be, I think, important.
Yeah, that is so important. And I've heard it said, how can you build a healthy multi-ethnic church unless you first build a healthy multi-ethnic life? And that's exactly what you're talking about there, in that those developing those cross-cultural relationships that leads to competence, that leads us into that arranged setting where we embrace it. We're not forced into it. We want it. We want the heart of God. We want to experience Revelation 7:9 on earth. Mark, talk to us about you. I know that you set out the same way on the relationship side. I've been to your church. I've seen that, your interaction with the mayor and with others in the community, particularly the Korean community. You built relationships along the way. But talk to us as that, as well as some of the other steps that you've taken, transferable truths, if you will, that you could pass on to folks listening today.
Well, two words of advice I would give. One is, Libin is absolutely correct. You cannot have a multicultural church without living a multicultural life. And so what we began some 12 years ago now is we began what we called cross-class. And we said it's cross-cultural, it's going across ethnic backgrounds, but it's also cross-generational. And
I think we lost Mark for a moment here. Let's see if he comes back. If not, Oscar, RJ, we'll go up to you on the same question. Why don't you guys pick it up, and then when Mark comes back, we can do it that way.
You go.
I think one of the things, when we think about multicultural ministry in the church, we're not just talking about doing translation or doing a special event. I think, and we're not trying people to really fit in what we're doing. I think the main goal is to help people they feel they belong here, and that's one of the biggest purpose for us. One of the things that I think that helping us with the vision is we have had mission trips that we do. And those are mission trips that we have people from both congregation, and we do it locally, but also worldwide. Like in the past 3 or 4 years, we had taken couple mission teams to other Nazarene churches around in our district and help them do ministry and do anything they need in the church. And we took a team to El Salvador this year. So I think it's giving people opportunity to experience working with other people and just not only as leading that, but open opportunity for them to lead in other contexts.
Yeah, there's something special that happens when you're swinging a hammer next to someone you can't speak to. You don't know the same language. You figure out Google Translate. You figure out hand gestures, all those types of things. And so I think it's a big one. I think another really important one for us has been deciding when to come together and deciding when to not come together. Because when we first started working together, I think we both thought the humble thing to do is always be together. And you just kind of make it work. And I can remember we thought the most important times to be together on was Easter. That's the big service. And we have a gigantic sanctuary. And so we can fit so many people in there. And it just wasn't working. We were doing all translation, all those types of things. So Easter would come, and both of our the numbers, so English speaking, Spanish speaking, bilingual services, all the numbers would dip. And we did this for 3 years. And I just thought, as the majority culture pastor, we just need to humble up and this is what happens. You just take a hit on Easter. What I didn't realize is that he was feeling the same thing. And so we started talking, and he said, what if we didn't come together? What if we came together and we did an English service and then a big joint party with the egg hunt and then a Spanish service and then a big, joint meal? And so we decided that it was strategic and important for us to decide when to not come together, because it made it easier for people to bring their friends. And so we've had all kinds of things with, when you're working with so many different cultures, there's a lot of different thoughts on Halloween. And so you have to think about all the different countries, and do we come together? Do we not come together? What about Dia del Niño? What about all these different things? So I think it's important for pastors to realize you have permission to not just force everything. And so you can decide, this is a good time to come together. This is not a good time to come together. This is a good time to come together. But
Yeah,
really,
that's
the relationship of working beside each other, I think that's the most important.
Yeah, that's such an important point as well. That's not one size fits all. And people that are generally new to the dance presume that a multi-ethnic church is going to always be together. I have my own stories, the very similar stories I won't go into now, where we were in the first 5 years just really forcing everybody together. But it's really about intentionality and thinking about the context that you're in, the capacity that you have, even something as simple as the ability to translate. Is there a strong translator? As well as where you're at on a journey. It's not either you are or you're not a healthy multi-ethnic church. In my opinion, we're all on a continuum of learning and of growth. If you think about it, as I mentioned earlier, there are some churches on the one hand that want nothing to do with anyone who's not like them. On the other hand, there's Revelation 7:9, and we will all be there in that perfected corporate body someday, the bride of Christ. But until then, we're on this journey of sanctification. Just like in our own individual lives, we as leaders should be helping the church in a corporate way pursue sanctification towards the vision of Revelation 7:9. And again, it's sometimes it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It definitely is a 7 to 10 year at least journey to move from the early stages to where you feel some measure of stability but it's a journey that you're on. All three of you, in terms of the three groups, all four of you really are speaking to that journey. I want to take the final 10 minutes or so, though, to lean into, again, continue to give us principles, if you would. But I know that we all understand and agree that the vision of a healthy multi-ethnic church, the unity and diversity that Libin was talking about, is not to get a bunch of diverse people in the room singing Kumbaya, patting ourselves on the back that we are a church for all people, not just some. But as I wrote in my first book, it's mobilizing for impact. It's impacting, it's leveraging the unique power and the unique pleasure of God that dwells when diverse men and women will themselves to walk, work, worship him together as one. There's the intrinsic power. There's a pleasure of God in that. And yes, we feel it within the church. But of course, the mission of God is to turn that pleasure, that power of God outward, the expression of unity and diversity, so that we are communicating a credible gospel for all people, not just some. I call that mobilizing for impact. And when you think about that this wonderful opportunity that we have uniquely is not homogenous churches, but churches pursuing that multi-ethnic vision. Libin, let's start with you. Talk about how you are mobilizing your people, the diversity and the unity that you have, to actually impact the community when people can see here is a church not just for some people, but for people like me. How are you mobilizing to impact the community, to meet empathetic needs, to meet people at the bridge of Christ humanity, and leveraging the power and the pleasure of God in unity and diversity to do that?
Yeah, you were talking about the Antioch church, and the church in Antioch was also very missional, not because the crisis in Jerusalem and other places was like a headlines, but it was personal to the people there. And so they cared about what was happening in the world because the world was represented there. And so I think even pastorally, when there's crisis in the global earth or whatever it may be, like, man, we feel that internally, not just because we saw it in the news, but we see people who worship with us and who stand next to us, who are grieving the loss of something that just happened in the Middle East or what's happening in Ukraine. Or so, like, on Sunday, I'll see people from Russia and Ukraine sitting just down the same aisle, or people from Israel and Palestine. So it's just amazing to see how pastoral ministry is actually accentuated when you have representation of the world, and it gives you a chance to minister to the world, to the people who are from those places. One thing we started to do in terms of mobilizing is we actually started meeting with different ethnic groups. Our multicultural ministry is called cross-cultural, and that's intentional, that the cross is what shapes our culture, and it calls us to cross-culture. So that's cross-cultural ministry. But we began to meet with each ethnic group just to have a lunch with them and our cross-cultural ministry team, our leadership team, really to cast at least 3 or 4 vision. One, we want you to feel seen and known here, because even in a large congregation, you may wonder if there's others like you. And there's 150 people from South Asia just a few weeks ago that are having lunch together. So there are people just like you. 2, we encourage you to connect with a diverse body within our church, not just to isolate within yourself. And 3, you actually have the greatest advantage of missionally reaching people who are from the same cultural background. And so whether a workplace, like, use your ethnic makeup as an advantage to connect culturally, but as they come into the life of our church, let them see how broad and beautiful the body of Christ is. And so using actually your ethnicity as the tip of the spear, but bringing them into a fully inclusive environment where they see the beauty of God. And so actually inviting our different ethnic groups to have a vision broader than just attending, but to say, no, God's called you on a mission, and we belong together as the body of Christ. And that's actually been a beautiful way to take advantage of the uniqueness of our body and the people in it, and to mobilize them to mission. And now our mission trips are filled with people from different backgrounds, and they jump on a trip to South America because they can speak the language, and now our Anglos like, man, this is amazing, because we really feel like we're on the same team together. As we have local outreaches, I mean, just 2-3 miles from our church is large Hispanic communities or large South Asian communities, and so now that there's something we can do together that we could not do if we were isolated. I think that's what I'm learning. There's so much beauty in doing this together that we wouldn't be able to do this if we were isolated. I think David Anderson had this beautiful illustration of this orchestra. Homogenous churches make up one section, or the orchestras. If you're a white church or black church, like, you're one section of the orchestra. But really, the harmony of the orchestra comes when churches come together. And a multi-ethnic church gives and produces the sound of heaven because it is all the children of God worshiping as one. And I think that harmony needs to be heard, especially in a divided world. If that harmony, that sound of heaven can be produced by the church, by the power of the Holy Spirit, it is a missional advantage to the gospel going forward.
A missional advantage in the harmony. That illustration, very, very powerful, of course. And you're thinking about, again, I think about it in terms of credibility. Like when you're preaching a gospel for all people, not just some people, in an increasingly diverse society, people are not finding that message credible when it's proclaimed from segregated pulpits and pews. You're from that one section of the orchestra, you're saying there's a place for you in our band, there's a place for you in our orchestra, but they don't see it. And of course, in the 21st century, this is not a century of words as much as it is a century of doing good works. Matthew 5:16, let them see your good works. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, the workmanship that we, the church, were created for from the beginning of time to model on earth as it is in heaven. Jews and Gentiles, rich and poor, men and women, willing themselves to be that beautiful, harmonious orchestra. This is credibility. It's about advancing a credible gospel. RJ, Oscar, we're going to finish up with you. Unfortunately, I think we've lost Mark. I saw he was trying to get back on. He has wonderful insights in a couple of books. You can look those up online if you're watching or listening. But RJ, Oscar, talk to us about this idea. Again, it's not about just singing Kumbaya together and looking around and say, aren't we a wonderful church, a wonderfully diverse church? But it's about mobilizing for impact. How are you all doing that in Bend, Oregon?
I think one wonderful thing that we start seeing in our church from the last couple of years is seeing family from the Spanish group reaching out English-speaking families, like people like Spanish-speaking people that work with English-speaking people. And I think we have several families in the English group that have come to the church because Spanish-speaking people have invited them to come, or the opposite. Spanish-speaking family have come to our group, our church, because English-speaking people have reached out to them. So I think for me, that is one of the beauty, having this vision that we're one church. We're not just trying to reach people that talk the same like we do or look the same that we do, but reaching people that they're totally different from us. So for me, that had been a big change to see happen in our church. People preaching and reaching people that look different than them.
It's always interesting when someone shows up to the Spanish service and someone that doesn't speak Spanish brought them, or someone shows up to the Spanish service and someone who doesn't. I mean, that's a really neat thing. Recently, my wife dropped a bomb on me, and I've used this bread illustration forever about the difference between intercultural and multicultural and all this type of stuff. I probably stole it from one of your guys' books, actually. And so I was using this bread, and I would make dough, and I would put all the ingredients in a pot and be like, this is multicultural, and then you dump them all out, you knead them together, you make dough. This is intercultural. I was on a date with my wife, and she said, I've always hated that illustration, and I've been telling it for like 20 years. And I'm like, it would have been nice to know a while ago. And then our dinner was served, and she's like, it's more like this. And she had this steak with chimichurri and roasted vegetables and all this stuff. And you could see every ingredient, but it came together to produce something amazing. It wasn't like the dough that I was like, all the ingredients go away and we're something new. And we go into the fire and God, but I had the whole thing. But she was like, it's more like this, where the cultures aren't, you highlight the best things that come out of cultures, and you bring them together. And this is the picture that we want for the church. Is it's not we're taking all the culture out of things, or we're becoming separate, something different, but we're bringing the best out of all the cultures that God brings together. And I think one of the most practical ways that we try to do that is with our music. And it's not just, singing in different languages and that kind of stuff. It's this realization that, worship music has really been kind of colonized by the West. All the songs we sing are written by the same couple of churches in America. And there's beautiful music that comes from all over the world. And so for us in like our Christmas services here, instead of just singing the same songs we sing, we say, we're going to teach you a song that's really important to African American churches around the world. And you're going to learn this. And we're going to sing the number one Christmas song of South America. And we're going to learn this together because we want to be this beautiful meal that God is preparing. And it's bringing out the best of all these different cultures. And it's a tough thing for people to give up their favorite Christmas carols. But it's a beautiful thing when people say these are important songs to people that are coming together from around the world. And so I think that's one real practical way that you can do is thinking about who's writing the music that you're singing. Is it the same churches, or are there things from Africa and the Middle East and South America and Central America that you can bring together and teach your church? And one of the things that we have here, and it might not be the best saying, but we tell our people consistently, our goal is shared discomfort for God's glory. Like, we're all uncomfortable in the midst of this. And we're all sacrificing something, but we think we are uncomfortable, and we're doing the hard thing because it brings God glory.
Yeah, and I think the doing the hard thing goes back to the prophetic as well as the pace that Libin brought up. I mean, I think the last thing we want to do is split a church in the name of unity, right? So how we introduce these things and why. And of course, if this is John 15, the branch has to be cut back every now and then to bear additional fruit. And I always look at it, there's plenty of churches in this city that you can go to, whoever you are, to get your meal every single Sunday, to get your past experience, preferences, your personality met. But the unique value proposition that we're offering is something different. And as people come and go in the normal rhythms of church and seasons of church being involved, we're always looking for or being able to leverage, like John 15, to see new fruit being produced as we continue to embrace the uniqueness, if you will, of our value proposition, but in a way that makes it accessible to others. You talk about your illustration. The best one I ever heard is my good friend Sung Cha Ra, who talked about a salad bowl, right? And in that salad bowl is lettuce, tomato, cucumber, onions, croutons, whatever it may be. And in the American church, we like that type of salad, but we have poured over throughout history. We've poured ranch sauce over the whole thing. So when you taste the lettuce, it tastes like ranch sauce. You taste the tomato, it tastes like ranch sauce, right? His point is get rid of the sauce so we can taste the lettuce, taste the cucumber, taste the crouton, the onion. And this is what is the true multi-ethnic in the same sense your wife was talking about. That's the illustration he says. And it's rooted in scripture. This is exactly what Paul prays for in Ephesians chapter 3 to the church. I pray that you would know the height, the breadth, the length, the depth of God's love, the experience of that, experiential knowledge of how broad and wide and high and deep his love is for us. And I think about, okay, maybe the white people, they got the depth of God's love, but they don't bring the breadth or the length or the width. Or maybe the Asian Indians, they bring the depth. And each people group, just like those ingredients in the South, they bring something to the table that is unique from their culture, their perspective, an aspect of God and understanding his love for all people. And Paul prayed that the diverse church at Ephesus would experience this unity and this diversity by getting rid of the sauce, if you will, in terms of Sung Cha's his illustration on that. And that's such a beautiful thing. Mark, you're back. We're just towards the closing, but I'm going to give you a second to go back and recover, because at the time we lost you were talking about not only developing cross-cultural relationships, but pursuing cross-cultural competence in an intentional way. And then I'll give you one more question to finish up. But take us back to what you were going to say.
Well, we form what we call cross classes, at least 3 different ethnic groups, at least 30 years between the oldest and the youngest person in the class. And what we have learned is that, this is not a class in imparting knowledge. This is not something of which we're even discipling people in multicultural model. What we're doing is providing an atmosphere by which people can be able to share their experience, and therefore we have a shared experience that comes together. And what has happened has developed some tremendous relationships through those cross classes that have been lasting and have been impactful in our church. One illustration I'll give you very quickly. One of our oldest leaders in the life of our church, a couple who've been in Duluth their entire life, in their early 80s, attended a cross class, and the lady, the wife of the couple, said, I grew up here in Duluth. I would have never been allowed to been in a living room where there were black people. And you could almost hear the air suck out of the room when she said that. It was like, oh my goodness, what's going to come next? Is there going to be something that's going to bring us back to center? And we had just brought on a new pastoral intern who was living with us at the time from Nigeria, he and his wife and 2 children. And so he was sitting in the classroom. He's a PhD student at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. He stood up from where he was sitting on one side of the room, walked across to the other side of the room, and embraced her and said, "Aren't you glad that that'll never be said again?" Mm-hmm. And we have watched those two embrace during our welcome time every single Sunday since that time. Mm-hmm. That's what we wanted to happen through cross class, is to provide the atmosphere by which that could take place. And the one principle I wanted to share is that I learned from this guy by the name of Mark DeYmaz in a book called Building a Healthy Multi-Ethnic Church 12 years ago, where he said the difference between accommodation and assimilation. So many churches are assimilation churches. They even have, there's so many churches that even have pastors that say, pastor of assimilation. And the whole concept is, you can become one of us if you'll become like us. Mm-hmm. If you assimilate to our model and our way of thinking, our way of doing things, then you'll fit in here. But accommodation says, we value you for who you are. Teach us from your perspective so that we might embrace the best of your culture to be a part of our new Christ culture. And we've watched that happen across the years. We now have a culture celebration every single month. We usually do it with a meal. We found that almost every culture other than American culture has a meal after worship service. And so once a month, we have a culture celebration and a culture meal after church. And so next Sunday, this coming week, we're going to be selling Tres Reyes Magos, Three Kings Day, a Hispanic celebration of Christmas where the kings come and give gifts to the children. That'll be happening in our church. Only about 18% of our church is Hispanic, but I guarantee you 100% of the church will be celebrating Tres Reyes Magos this coming Sunday. Mm-hmm. We'll celebrate East Asian New Year in February. Over half the world celebrate New Year on the lunar calendar rather than on the solar calendar. And so we'll celebrate along with all of our Asian friends and neighbors and church members East Asian New Year. On the Sunday nearest to August 15th, we'll celebrate India's Independence Day. We have a Hindu temple 100 yards from our church. I've been told that anything within a 5-mile radius of a Hindu temple is considered holy ground. We are living on holy ground according to Hindus, but we want the Hindus to know that we have the ability to be able to share with them about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Mm. And so you don't have to check your culture at the door in order to become a part of our church. And what has happened is we have 3 generational families that now attend our church, where grandma and grandpa, they have never been a member of a church outside of their culture-centric world. The parents have come here to the United States, and oftentimes they're looking for ways to assimilate themselves into American culture. And their children speak English, and oftentimes not even the mother language. And all 3 of those generations now exist in our church and are able to be a part of a body that loves them and accommodates them and desires what's best for all of them.
Mm. Taking intentional steps, promoting a spirit of inclusion. These things are not woke in the sense of the world's use of the term. These are biblical for the sake of the gospel. You guys are using the word cross culture this, cross that, right? Christ said, if I be lifted up, I draw all people to myself, not just some. And that, of course, is the great work of the gospel on the cross. All right, we're going to finish up, folks. As you're listening, I want to go around the horn. RJ, Oscar, Libin, Mark, thank you for joining me. But I'm going to give you guys 30 to 45 seconds. Years ago, I was at Exponential. Rick Warren came up to me and he said, what's the one thing I got to do? He said that his neighborhood around Saddleback at the time had become 50% non-white. And he came up to me and he said, Mark, what's the one thing I got to do? Now, at that point, I'd probably written 150,000 words or more on the subject of multi-ethnic church, but it's Rick Warren. He wants one thing, right? Like that old movie, if you're old enough to remember, not Blazing Saddles, what was that movie? The City Slickers, right? And he said, what's the one thing I got to do, right? So I'm going to do that with you guys, 30 to 45 seconds. You're talking to someone who's either planting a multi-ethnic church from the get-go, trying to transition is what our topic has been today. You got 30 to 45 seconds. Libin, we're going to start with you. What's the one thing you're going to tell me that I got to do to make sure this thing happens and is set off in a good way?
Yeah, communicate the gospel in a way that culture can understand it. Like understand the values and the narrative. So there be a shame culture or guilt culture. Innocent, there are incredible ways to communicate the gospel of Jesus to the people group that you're surrounded by. So understand their language, not just the language they speak, but the way that they frame stories and narratives and communicate the gospel in that narrative and become multilingual to the way that they understand value systems.
Fantastic. RJ, Oscar, what about you guys?
I think for me is to help our people to feel that they belong here of any church. Not only that they only fit to our program or our vision, but really that they feel they have found a family, that they can feel that they belong here.
Yeah, I love that. Not just attending, right? I think about when you just said that, I think about not just attending, that you can attend here, but you belong here. So good. RJ, what about you?
I mean, in our particular model, it would be persevere through hardship. I think someone has to pay the price for churches that are over 100 years old to change.
Yes.
And you have to expect that it's going to be tough, and you have to expect that you need to persevere. And we kept asking ourselves the question, are we willing to endure this to see the beauty on the other side? And my mentor had told me, he's like, I would expect 7 to 10 years of hard transition before this becomes a culture, but then another 7 to 10 years to cement it, that this is what happens for the next 100 years.
Yeah, Eugene Peterson talks about the fruit of long obedience in the same direction, right? That passion, the patience, the prayer, the persistence is how it comes out. Mark, you got the final word.
Be an example. We've talked about multicultural church begins with a multicultural lifestyle. Pay careful note to who you affiliate with and who you befriend and how you go about doing it. Who are you going out to lunch with? Who are you sitting under and being taught by? And that was certainly part of my life. I looked for persons of peace. That's what a missiologist calls it. Someone who can teach me so that I can reach others. And so I looked for those kinds of people in my life and continue to do so.
Well, guys, gals, everybody listening here, I'm so thankful, especially these folks joining me today, my good friends, Mark, Libin, RJ, and Oscar, the great work they're doing. What I can assure you is these are guys not just talking about these things in a philosophical way or theoretical way. They're getting it done on the ground, and their churches will have the bios up for you. Their churches, you can look into them, get in touch with them, learn from them, particularly if you're trying to transition a church from homogeneity to a healthy, multicultural, multi-ethnic vision on earth as it is in heaven. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. And if you're listening, watching, finished up with us, keep in mind Exponential Global's coming up, the regional conferences. We want to see you there. And we do have, both in terms of the pre-conference and tracks and lunch opportunities, to interact with folks like Mark, Libin, RJ, and Oscar, talking about the multi-ethnic church in practical ways, people that are getting it done on the ground, practicing. So again, I'm Mark DeYmaz on behalf of Exponential and Exponential Next. Thanks so much for joining us today.